Welcome to rSlash where an employee gets fired and takes the company down with them. Our next Reddit post is from Vard. My friend had a professor in college who would occasionally go on a rant about how some of the items from Taco Bell don't even technically classify as food by some standards. Though not often, it was a passionate rant. A day after one of his rants, a student brought in a bag of food from Taco Bell. The professor objected, "There's no food allowed in my classroom." The student held up the bag to show the logo and said, "Don't worry, it's not food," and took a bite of a taco while maintaining eye contact. After a moment of surprise, the teacher admitted defeat with a polite but disgusted nod. The next day, he directed the student's attention to a revised syllabus, specifically the new rule, no food or Taco Bell allowed at any time in the classroom. Given that the class was Introduction to Law, the teacher gave him extra credit. Our next Reddit post is from Everybody's Therapist. I worked for a company doing their media design, as in graphic design, photography, live event audio and video editing, etc. This company held big events, and over my years at the company, I was given more and more unrelated responsibilities until I was doing the jobs of at least 4 people. They also never helped pay for any materials, so all the necessary media equipment was paid for out of my pocket. All the equipment had my name on them to make sure that it wouldn't get lost if I lent it out. Over the years, I'd accumulated a pretty impressive supply through secondhand purchases and watching for deals. By the time I hit my 5th year there, I had thousands of dollars of high-end equipment that was used for almost every part of my company's promotion and event production. I think you can see where this was going. One day, I was brought into my boss's office and told they'd be downsizing and had someone fresh out of college with no real life experience and that they'd be taking over my job, more like jobs, as well as a few others. I was completely caught off guard. They then had one of the people from corporate follow me to my office to assist in cleaning out my stuff. He specifically said, "Take everything that's yours. You won't be coming back." So that's what I did. They clearly expected the usual paper box full of some photos and a plant, but instead I had them hauling crate after crate of our media and event supplies to my car. I had a 2004 Ford Explorer at the time, and by the time that I was left, it was filled to the brim. With every box that we took out to my car, my boss began to get more and more panicked. At one point he said, "You can only take things that are yours." And through my sadness and anger, I was able to find it in me to kindly tell him that every single thing I was taking was mine, and that I kept all receipts if he wanted proof. The final nail in the coffin was when I told him that I would need access to the arena's audio-video booth and the catwalk. I still remember the fear in his eyes. We went in, and I unplugged all of my cameras that I'd been lending to the events team, all of which were clearly marked with my name. I felt like the Grinch, just walking around and taking all the random things in the building that had my name on them. Driving away, I was heartbroken that a company I'd given 200% of myself to in every way had picked someone younger and fresh out of college to replace me. But I won't lie, the smugness of watching their face as I stripped the place bare was worth it. Looking back on it, that was the worst and most toxic job that I've ever had. The company only lasted another year before they folded entirely, and I like to believe that I had a hand in that. And to think, if they had just compensated me fairly and purchased the necessary things themselves instead of forcing me to provide my team with things, then they wouldn't have had to start from scratch. Our next Reddit post is from Warm Kitten. This happened last year, and in hindsight, I feel a little bad for the professor. He wasn't the worst professor I'd ever had, and he was up against a university that was in turmoil behind the scenes, and he was spearheading an untested new course. That being said, I was paying an exorbitant amount for this education, and he was being a douchebag, so meh. It was a history course, and one of the assignments was a group project wherein we presented in front of the class. There was a 3-hour seminar taking place in a lecture hall, the last hour of which was reserved for 2 groups to go up and present at a half-hour apiece. This would involve a Q&A session afterwards, just to keep us on our toes, I suppose. The professor really emphasized that we pick the week and topic that we're going to present in, and that's that. It's first come, first serve, and if you miss your spot, you get a 0. I thought nothing of it at the time, but it seemed fair. I didn't like his attitude, but whatever, right? Well, I won the lottery with the group that I was assigned. They were grand guys and a dream to work with. We decided on an advantageous week to present given our schedules, and we spent the time beforehand fine-tuning the presentation and really getting it to work. We used a stopwatch and everything. We even brought in outsiders to ask questions that we might not predict. All was well. Except we were presenting in week 5, and a disturbing pattern had emerged during the seminars in weeks 2, 3, and 4. For all the professors' talk about keeping things constrained and everyone working within a schedule, whoever went second was screwed. The first group always ran long, and the second group had to make do with at most 20 minutes. You could see the stress on their faces. So week 5 comes around, and the rest of my group, a little bit more nervous than I am, worries aloud whether or not all of our careful planning will be useless. I decide to throw a Hail Mary, thinking that the worst I could get is a no, right? So I go up right before class starts and ask the professor what are the odds that we might go first of the two groups. After all, we have this down to exactly 30 minutes. This dude proceeds to rake me across the coals in front of everyone. He was talking in a normal speaking voice, but the podium was right by the door and people were filing in. He tells me not to ask such a stupid question and to go back to my seat. I go back, tail between my legs, pissed off, and sit with steam shooting out of my ears for the next 2 hours. Sure enough, the other group goes first, and sure enough, they run long. We shoot concerned looks to the professor, who's too busy watching the other group to notice. 50 minutes later, the first group is just about wrapping up. The guys in my group are silently freaking out about this. It's a nightmare, right? That's when the professor stands up, polite applause all around, and then says, "Well, I guess we're finishing early today, huh?" Like a scene out of a courtroom drama, the 4 of us stand up like a shot and ask, "What the hell's going on?" He can't quite hear us from the back, and we're all talking at once, so he asks, "What's going on?" And I charge down those steps like King Kong. In the same tone of voice, in front of the same door that people were now filing out of, I tell this guy that we're booked for the assignment today and we have something prepared. "Huh?" he says. Turns out he totally just forgot that we were presenting today, and that's why he was so mad at my suggestion earlier. So I tell him we're presenting now, to an empty room, or he's giving us a 100. The poor guy sure did try. He insisted that we hadn't signed up this week. We had. He insisted that he could schedule us next week. Wouldn't work. 2 of us would be away that week. And he insisted that he had somewhere else to be. Not my problem, mate. The dude just had to deal with it. After making a phone call to presumably his next appointment, he had to stand there, white as a sheet, and just take it. I'll never forget the look on his face. So we presented to a lecture hall empty of all but the professor and 2 students who, I guess, wanted to see the show. We got a great grade to boot. Yeah, down in the comments, Bear Lindsay said exactly what I was thinking. I was expecting you to stand up in the middle of the first group for your scheduled start time, but this is so much better. Our next Reddit post is from Tyler's Burden. This happened a few years ago. I was the junior person in an office of mainly people older than me. As such, I was the geeky type of person and the go-to guy for people to get advice on technical stuff. One day, I found a great deal on laptops in Costco. They were selling some really nice Sony Vios for a really cheap price. I bought one, and I would have bought more to sell on my own, but I didn't really have the cash. My irksome team leader overheard me saying this at lunchtime in the office and then immediately went to Costco, bought 5 laptops, and then immediately put them up for sale on places like Craigslist, eBay, and Gumtree, which is a UK secondhand selling site. All the while, he was crowing that today's youth like to waste their money while the canny older generation save their money for lucrative investments. He sold one immediately for almost double the price he paid in Costco. This emboldened him to put the rest at 2.5 times the price that he paid for in Costco. For about a week, there was no update, and then one day, there was a cornucopia of excitement from where he sat. He had arranged to sell all the laptops to someone in Amsterdam for the inflated asking price. He talked about what an absolute wheeler and dealer he was, and kept on telling people what profit he was making and what he was going to do with the money. I told him that it was quite sketchy to ship goods privately abroad, and that it would be difficult to get any recourse if things went south, even if it went to places in Western Europe. Of course, this was me just being jealous of such a big shot, and that I knew nothing and I should keep my mouth shut because I had no idea what I was talking about. I tried to warn him again, but then I was called into the douchebag's office about prying into people's financial affairs, and that I wasn't to talk about anything that wasn't work-related with this guy, as he had obviously complained about me. I received a verbal warning and warned that if I did it again, then I would receive a written warning despite my protestations that I was merely reacting to what this guy was saying and I was trying to help him. Of course, the buyer, at the last minute, changed the shipping details to Lagos, Nigeria, and my stupid team leader started to show everyone the PayPal email confirmation that he had received the money. I should have told him to log into PayPal to check that the money had arrived and that it wasn't just a fake email. But I would have received a written warning, so I didn't. He packs up the laptops and sends them air freight to Lagos. Next day, the team leader wasn't quite so full of bombast as he had been previously. It took a few other people to pry out the story about how he'd been completely ripped off and had received nothing via PayPal. I was exerting a Herculean effort to keep the tiniest of smirks from appearing on my face, but my efforts were in vain. "You effing knew! Why didn't you tell me?" he screamed into my face. But I just carried on with my work and didn't say a word. Our next Reddit post is from Technos. A million years ago, I worked for a leasing company. We leased anything from manufacturing equipment to jets, but our bread and butter was computers. One fine day, a customer calls in to find their salesman is on vacation. They don't like that, not one bit. And after being told that no, they will not be getting the number for his hotel room in Aruba, they're passed on to Tommy. Tommy was the new guy, but in a good way. A customer would ask for something, and he'd spend 2 days reading white papers, benchmarks, and calling vendors to find the answer himself when he could have just asked the person next to him. Anyways, the customer wants 16 computers in a hurry with such and such requirements. They don't care how much it costs, but they need them as soon as possible. Tommy tells them he'll call back in an hour, and he needs to speak to vendors. Vendor number 1 says it'll take 3 weeks at least because they're out of stock. Vendor number 2 says it'll take 2 weeks and cost 20% more because they'll have to upgrade the existing systems. A third vendor quotes 3 weeks. Tommy, for the first time in his life, remembers that we have a former executive from the place that makes these computers on staff and calls him, begging for a contact that might make it go faster. The executive says, "How about today? We have 20 of those computers in the warehouse. Sure, they're supposed to go to this other customer, but that won't be for another 2 months. We can just fix the serial numbers later." Tommy thanks him and called the customer back. The customer said, "It's been almost 2 hours. Next time, don't promise a deadline that you can't meet." Tommy said, "Yeah, I know, and I'm sorry. I had to work pretty hard to track down what you need. And, well, I've got some good news and some bad news." "You called vendor number 1? "Yeah, and they can't have them to you for 3 weeks. "You call any other vendors?" "Yeah, I called vendor number 2, but they want a markup, but we can have it in 2 weeks. I also spoke with..." "What about the manufacturer?" "I called them too. They want 3 weeks, but we have..." "How much of a markup does vendor number 2 want?" 20%, but that doesn't matter because..." "Go ahead and order them." "But you haven't heard the..." "If I never hear another effing word out of your mouth, it'll be too soon. Just get it ordered, and I expect the paperwork by 8 a.m. tomorrow." This customer paid an extra $250,000 plus interest and fees. Also, due to delays with the orders, they didn't get their machines for 4 weeks. Our next Reddit post is from Pool of Cheddar. My boss was reluctant to do anything about a deadweight coworker because he wasn't making obvious mistakes. We decided to make it obvious. We had this coworker on our team. The best way to describe him is to use a Homer Simpson line. "Everyone says they have to work a lot harder when I'm around." Projects given to him usually were not completed correctly, not entirely completed, or not even worked on at all. He violated security protocols, gave out equipment to other departments, and would occasionally disappear for hours. He would always have someone else to blame for his problems, contractors, staff in other departments. But the last straw for the rest of us was when he tried to throw his own team under the bus. We all knew that he was skating by because we'd fix his mistakes to keep everything else running. And admittedly, it's hard to get fired from a state job. But after blaming us and us having to hear about it, that was the last straw. So the rest of us on the team just stopped helping him, and we stopped fixing his mistakes. He wasn't making obvious mistakes before, but now they were obvious. These mistakes were piling up, and fast. We would collaborate with him only down to the bare minimum. He had no reason to blame us if our contributions to a project were completed and his weren't. And then came the kiss of death. He took a week off. With him not around, everything that piled up started getting completed by the rest of us. New tasks were completed on top of that, and on time. Even my boss couldn't ignore the simple fact that the place ran smoother without him around. After he returned, everything started piling back up again. So we came into work a couple of weeks ago, and it was announced that he had left the organization. Not one person was surprised. The thing that amazes me about this whole thing is that nobody coordinated it. None of us hatched a plan. We all just individually decided that enough was enough. You want it obvious, you got it. That was rSlash_Maliciouscompliance, and if you like this content, check out my podcast where I publish the exact same episodes. Also, hit that subscribe button because I put out new Reddit videos every single day.